This whole issue of productivity started, at least being very public, when the Productivity Council and then Be the Business reported that there was this long tail of issue of productivity in the UK, which was created by SMEs. And there was a focus through Be the Business on leadership and technology as being two of the drivers of productivity. We had that again recently in the budget, where Rishi Sunak announced his Help to Grow schemes, which is about supporting SMEs in particular to access leadership and digital skills. I would contend, however, there is another element to productivity, and that's culture. And that's something that I think a lot of the Managing Partners Forum audience have actually sort of debated at length. And around that culture, I'm going to add in ownership, which of course is the area of expertise that I'm bringing to the panel this morning. And particularly employee ownership. So I lead the Employee Ownership Association. We're a membership organisation with a belief that business is stronger when people have a stake and a say in their employment. And it's really important, I think, just at the outset for me to explain that definition. So employee ownership is when everybody has a shared stake and a say in the business, unlike employee share ownership, where there is a shared stake for some, but not for all. And often that doesn't necessarily lend itself to having a voice as well. So we have a very clear definition of what we think employee ownership is and where it works best. And that's not to say that share ownership doesn't have its place in society, because it absolutely does. But I want to talk about the use of that version of employee ownership to drive productivity. So employee ownership is an increasingly popular model of ownership. In the professional services sector, it is rampant. So 60% of all employee-owned businesses in the UK are in the professional services sector. So you'll have heard of big global businesses like Arup and Mott MacDonald, but actually 20% of the Architects Journal's top 100 businesses are now employee-owned. So in the architectural civil engineering space, there is an increase that we've never seen really in the last 20 years over the last 5 years. Now I can explain more about why that has been. And in the professional services of legal and accountancy as well. So some sizable law firms like Hodge Jones Allen, Tapestry Compliance, Stephen Scown have all transitioned to employee ownership. Why have they done that? In the main, these businesses are looking at employee ownership, particularly at the point of succession planning. So when an owner or a founder or a group of owners or a group of partners are thinking about that challenge, which actually Dominic mentioned earlier, which is the promise of partnership. You know, if that's not now on the cards, how do you manage your succession and your legacy and your future? So employee ownership is becoming increasingly attractive at that point. This has been stimulated even more so by the government providing a very tax efficient way to do this through the Employee Ownership Trust, which has seen a rampant increase over the last few years. There's now somewhere in the region of over 500 businesses that have transitioned using the Employee Ownership Trust model since 2014 when it was introduced. And that's part of an overall marketplace, which we now expect to be over 600 to 700 employee-owned businesses. We'll get updates on the stats for that later on this year. Why does it work? Well, employee ownership really changes the relationship between the employer and the employee. And it does this by, I think, sharing three things. It shares, through the ownership stake, it shares information, it shares influence, and it shares reward. And so you have an ownership stake, either in a trust or through some direct shares, but everybody has access to that. So it's not an exclusive, it's an inclusive way of sharing that ownership stake. But going alongside that delivers that sharing of information. So you share the information about the performance of the firm with those owners. You share influence, so you give them a route to have a voice that really truly does influence, not just a notional employee forum that might meet once a week, or worse still, I've got an open office, an open door policy. That's not enough. You have a proper mechanism for some influence within the organisation. And of course, you share reward fairly across everybody. What that needs and what it leads to is higher levels of transparency, higher levels of trust, higher levels of empowerment, higher levels of engagement, but it also leads to higher levels of challenge. So when an owner has a stake in anything, they're going to make a challenge. So these businesses have to prepare themselves for the fact that these employee owners will quite often challenge the status quo. They'll quite often want to innovate. They'll quite often come up with ideas. But all of that leads to higher levels of productivity, higher levels of performance. I'll just finish off by saying we track the top 50 largest employee-owned businesses every year. Currently their combined sales are about 20 billion. They're employing around about 200,000 people. Last year, their operating profit was up 5% on the year before, like for like. And last year, their productivity level was up 6.9%, like for like, from the previous year.